It's day 160 of this project and things are slowly coming together, and I actually have the feeling that I might make my deadline. In the previous update I talked about the scenes that I defined and that I wrote out, and today we can actually have a look at the thumbnails or key moments of each of these scenes. Like I just said, last time I made these definitions for each scene. What is the objective of the scene? And I had some ideas of how that could happen. And this time I've actually made some thumbnails already. Made a simple storyboard basically for each of these scenes. So let's have a look at those. Scene 1, the city, is pretty straightforward. We start with a sun, just a white circle on a black background. It slowly dips below the horizon. Then some old like TV screens will go on with like the distortion, like the black and white pixels basically. Lights in the apartments will go on, street lights will go on, and the city will get brighter and brighter, and we end up with this view of the city that's just very bright, like almost an entirely white screen. That's scene 1. Scene 2 is called the forest. We go from that bright white city to the forest, which is dark. We see a bunch of trees, then we slowly move up throughout the trees to the top of the trees where we see all these peaks, and we see what we assume is the moon in the background, but then these two eyes light up in there, and then we see a character who wakes up, and then in the end of this scene we see this character standing at the edge of the forest. A lot of light coming into the forest, and he's standing at the edge of it. That's scene 2. Scene 3 is the meeting, which is a bit of a longer scene. We have that character that was standing at the edge of the forest. His name is actually Will. He will be walking into the city. He'll pass a bus stop, and then we cut to inside the city where this girl, that I called Ray for now, is sitting in front of this big window. We see Will again. He's in the city. He's looking up at the lights, at all the towers, at the buildings. Then we cut back to Ray, more like a close-up. We see her face. She has this like glazed over look on her face. She's not all there basically. Then we see Will again, so she's kind of seeing him outside her window. And then he intently looks directly at her, which kind of maybe not startles her, but just grabs her attention. And she looks more intently at him. And then from her perspective, it looks like Will is starting to grow and to black out all of the lights behind him, all of the city lights, the lights from the street lights, maybe from the cars as well. He's blacking out the entire screen. Then we see Ray from the top, almost like this down perspective from like Will, who is growing, down to her, and then she actually snaps out of it. It's like this little sort of dream-like sequence. She snaps out of it. She's still in that coffee place in that big window that she was in before, and she's woken up now basically. That's scene 3. From there we move on to scene 4, which is called Curtain. This is a transition where Ray goes from the light, the inside environment she was in, to the outside, which is now all dark. We see Ray sitting in front of the window. We saw her from outside before, we see her from inside, and from the back now. This black window outline that will grow to fill the entire screen. Then we see Ray from the front. She looks a bit puzzled, but she's intrigued by this new blackness basically in front of her. She reaches out with one hand, she touches it, and she runs her hand across it, and then she actually finds a seam that she can run her hand through. And then from the other side, so we see her fingers poking through. We see her move it like a curtain to the side, poke her head through. Then she actually steps through entirely, lets go of the curtain, and it closes behind her. And again, the screen is filled with black, and we see Ray standing in front of it. And that's where scene 4 ends, Curtain. Then we move on to scene 5, the second last scene. It's called Follow. Ray is outside now, and across the street she sees Will. She wants to rush over to him, but before she can cross the street, he gives her a stop. She does, stops in her tracks. A car shoots by, it's a street light, and in true Michael Bay fashion, it catches fire. Ray does a quick double take. We see the car that's on fire, and Will gives her like calm down, pace yourself gesture. So she takes a deep breath, but then when she opens her eyes again, then Will is actually already walking down the street. And from there we move on to this sequence that I have in mind where they pass under a big row of all these street lights, which go out one by one basically. They flicker and then go out. And Ray notices this. She does like a quick twirl, like a twist, and looking up at the light. And then when she looks in front of her again, we see Will standing still at the last street light that's still lit, basically, that's still emitting light. And he actually disappears into the background, into the darkness. So when Ray actually gets to that last street light, Will is nowhere to be seen. And we see her maybe looking around, or she's a bit frustrated. And then we slowly zoom out until we have this almost entirely black screen with just this little white dot in the middle, which is Ray under this not finally lit, but the last street light that is lit. And that's where the scene ends. Finally, we have scene 6, which is called Note, because an idea I had but scratched. Ray now is alone underneath this final street light. She looks up at it, and we see the street light in this very distorted perspective with some moths circling the light. Then she looks down, and we see this service hatch basically that's on all of the light posts, and the wiring is in there. And then she kicks it, and the screen goes black, maybe with one of those onomatopoeia, like those words, bam or tonk. And then the screen is totally black. There actually is another scene that doesn't fit in that scene progression from 1 to 6. This is a scene that I will cut back to at different times within the animated short. And the scene actually goes like this. Ray is floating in the sea of white. We zoom in a little. She is totally comfortable. She appears to be asleep. Then we see her from the side, mainly her face, again totally comfortable. She slowly starts sinking. She sinks below the surface, keeps sinking, 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 sinking. And then at some point we just zoom in on her feet, which at some point touch the ground and settle. Then we see Ray straight in her face. She wakes up, or she opens her eyes, and she has this little smirk appear on her face, and then the screen cuts to black. So this scene, I'm not 100% sure where all the parts of it will be within those other scenes, in between those other scenes. But it is something that I will cut back to at sometimes throughout the animated short. That is the run through of my storyboard of all those 6 scenes with that bonus scene that I will cut back to every once in a while. In the next weeks, I will be working towards the halfway point of this project, which will be around day 184, because that marks half a year. And I gave myself a year to make this animated short. And at that point, I want to have the storyboard finalized. I want to have the final version of my storyboard, and I make air quotes because it's not going to be set in stone 100%, but it needs to be good enough to actually start animating, because the second half year of this project I really want to spend on animating all my scenes. So wish me luck. Scene 2. Gesture. We'll do that one more time. We'll do that one more time. Turn them into a storyboard. Let's have a look. Hoeft allemaal niet zo moeilijk.